when you have the power to transition someone else, to offer them a guide, to bring in an angel, to stand up to an emotional situation with grace and courage, something inside of you grows spiritually on a level you wouldn't have imagined. But there's something even more precious, and it is the gratitude of those whom you have helped. Every birth is a dawn, and every death is a night, each one eternally folding into the next.
Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna Podcast. This podcast is meant to encourage you to connect within so you can share your light with the world. And now, here's your host, Harrison Ma.
Welcome, beautiful beings, to another episode of the Cosmic Love Antenna. This is your weekly installment of your inner connection to your outer expression, where I, your host, Harrison, with the beautiful guests that I get to interact with and converse with, aim to pull back the layers restricting health, alignment, and love. And today is no exception of that. Before I introduce the beautiful soul that I have on the show here today, a loving reminder of, if you've tuned in, if you're new to the show, welcome. If you are a returning guest, I love you very much. Thank you for continuing to support this powerful, expanding conversation. Ways that you can support this conversation is by sharing it out to friends and family members that can resonate with the topic today. Remember, you can leave reviews over on Apple and Spotify. It helps us reach more beings that need it. And if you're looking for more tribe and community around the show and container, you can now join the Facebook group, / Cosmic Love Antenna. So I'd love to see you over there. All right. So the beautiful guest that I want to introduce today that we're going to have a chat around is Tina Erwin. Tina is a powerful being in her own right. She is a ghost helper, which we're going to get into today. She has a background in metaphysics. She has a naval background, and she's a powerful heart in her own right. We're going to get into a discussion today about all things connecting to ghosts and helping them, what this means for our grief, what this means for our understanding around death, crossing over souls, the prayers that we can use to enhance this beautiful conversation, and so much more. Tina, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Harrison, thank you so much for having me. I'm simply delighted to be here.
Me too, my friend. And when we first had our sort of pre-chat, there was a lot moving through both of us at that time. So since we had that pre-conversation, there's been a big part of me that's been really excited for this deep dive. So, Tina, where I want to start here is where I start with all my guests, is just a little bit of a background on who you are. And I think a good way to frame that is, usually in our path, our journey, we have moments, pivotal moments that have shaped the soul that we are in this present moment, sharing the gifts that we share. So I'm wondering, my friend, what was maybe the moment, or, a couple of the moments that really led you down to the soul that I'm getting to speak to here today?
Harrison, that's a very important question, because we all have turning point moments in our lives. And my opinion is that everyone is psychic on some level. Literally, you can't drive a car if you're not psychic and sense the drivers around you. And oh my gosh, I think that person's going to change a lane. And then there are those of us who are aware that we have a little bit more. Like, all of us love music, but some of us are musicians. And some of us are brilliant musicians. And so I discovered that I was something of I learned I had psychic ability. And right after I was married and I was in the Navy, as soon as I married my husband, it's like a door opened up and I became more aware of things. It's an awareness. When we lived in Italy, I became more aware that ghosts were there. And I have a book called Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, and I have 3 volumes. In volume 3, I describe having dinner with one of my coworkers, another lieutenant. When we were in Italy, I was a lieutenant with the Navy, and we're having dinner, and I look in the corner, in her apartment, and there's a man standing there with a fedora hat and a raincoat, and he looks like he's right out of a 1940s novel. And it kind of takes your breath away, and that you can see him at all.
And Tina,
So
let me ask a question
yes.
about that, because I've had beautiful guests on my show. I keep getting these kind of stories, and they're wonderful. But I think we have, like you're suggesting, we have a beautiful nuance on how we experience those things. So was it purely image? Did you just see the image of this being? Did you hear some things? Was it more clairsentience? What was the main sense in which you were sort of interacting with this ghost or this soul?
It sounds like it should be something momentous, but she was ironing her uniform and I was just keeping her company. And I looked into a corner I'm also a student of studying feng shui, and there was a corner with dead energy. So there was no movement of energy in that corner. And I saw him, through my mind's eye. But when I looked in the corner with physical eyes, I felt like that's how I saw him. And that was new for me. It's one thing to sense them around you and have that weird, your hair stands up feeling, but I could physically see him. And then there's the next moment is, what do I do with that? And then the thoughts, is he going to harm me? Is he going to harm my friend? Does she know he's here? All these tons and tons of thoughts. So I decided that since I knew she was pretty psychic herself and very open to these concepts, I turned to her and I said, Cindy, do you know you have a ghost living with you? And it was one of those moments. It was just not what I expected. So she turns to me and she says, oh, you can see him? Oh, I'm so thrilled. He's been with me all my life and I love him. Okay, not where I was going with this. And I said, you know you have a ghost living with you? And she said, yes, I do. And then I'm having a conversation with him now in my head where he's saying, yes, I've been with her since she was born. We had another life together. She died. We both died. She came back and I just sort of stayed with her and followed her as a soul, which is a whole different discussion in itself. And it was a huge introduction for me to do not judge the situation. It may not be what you think. He was not harmful. In fact, he saved her life several times. During that time, I didn't know how to cross over a ghost. She was so happy with the situation that she had a fabulous naval career. She, retired as a Navy captain. She did really well. She was extremely competent. And she never married, never dated. She was in love with a ghost. Well, eventually we left Charleston and we left Italy and we moved back to Charleston, South Carolina. And because of the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, the entire city and all the surrounding area is haunted. And plus you have the Native American people who live there. And we bought a house that was 18 months old and we had no idea it was haunted because although in some places I could sense that it was haunted, I didn't get anything from this until the day we moved in. And I'm there by myself. My husband went to navigator school. He was a navigator on a ballistic missile submarine. And I could hear someone walking above me. I could hear his footsteps. And I'm, camping out on an air mattress and there's nobody in the house but me. And I'm just terrified. And we had that ghost for almost 7 years. And the story of that is in the first ghost book, what happened with that. And I spent all of that time trying to understand, how do you cross over a ghost? What is that process? I contacted the Duke University School of Parapsychology. I went to enormous lengths. I got every book, I studied, and that was the purpose, to study.
Let me jump in here, Tina, because I want to break that down because I know that's a big part of the work that you do. But let's take a step back here, and thank you for sharing those two stories. And I'm sure you have many more in the books that you've been talking about. But I really, as people are listening, beautiful souls out there in the podcast world, as you're listening to Tina's story, To me and to obviously Tina, this is normal now, right? This is these sort of conversations, they become a part of a reality once we accept them. But if you're listening to this episode and this is still very new to you, or it might sound a bit crazy and out there, I would, for the rest of this episode, just sit with an open heart and open mind and just notice how this makes you feel. Because when we interact with these beautiful souls, which we're going to get into today, and Tina's going to help us take this journey, the interaction isn't just for them, right? The interaction is for both people involved, right? There's something that needs to be shared. So as you're listening today, my intention is that you can bring this into your life, right? And you don't have to become a ghost helper and do all the beautiful things that we're going to talk about today, but just take a step to be open and to see what happens. Tina, with this now, with your beautiful story and your outline and these experiences, can you break down for us what is a ghost helper? What is this role that you've found yourself in? How would you describe it to someone that's new to this work?
I would go back to hard science, basic physics, the most basic level. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Very simple. It's basic science. So we know that the energy of water is never destroyed. We know the cycle of a butterfly. A human being comes from somewhere, and when we no longer occupy the corporal frame, we go somewhere. And it took me years to put the pieces together because, like a lot of people, I have a very inquiring mind. I wanted to understand it on a science level. Okay, so you are animated, and I'm a pretty animated person, and I've known incredible characters. What happens to that person when they leave the body? And then I discovered there was a Russian scientist whose last name is Karillian. And he was able to photograph people as they were dying, and he captured on film the soul leaving the body. Again, we're going back to hard science. Because I know people say, oh, there's no such things as ghosts, but you cannot deny basic physics, laws of thermodynamics. So if you can't wrap your brain around a ghost, I understand. But if we break it down into basic science and physics, perhaps it's more embraceable. And we live in the third dimension of time and space and gravity. Time and space can't exist on Earth without gravity, which holds us in place so that we can move through our days, anchored to the powerful gift that gravity is. However, when we die, when the heart stops beating, our connection to the divine is by something called a silver cord. And when that silver cord becomes cut through death, then we move from the third dimension, time and space and gravity, to something called the fourth dimension. And perhaps the easiest way to look at that dimension is it's like a step-up transformer. Moving into the heaven world is a very, very big frequency shift. And it also depends on how you died. So when you die, you move into this almost like a waiting area. I call it the fourth dimension. Some people call it the ether. It's all correct. And for most people, they see the light. The light comes for them, and it's wonderful. And there's a variety of reasons that people don't see it. Some people don't know they're dead, so they don't even know they're a ghost. But for those who do see the light, then they move to the fifth dimension or the heaven world. And that is a place of great joy and delight and hope and beauty beyond words.
Yeah. And Tina, just to jump in here super quick, we, just for new listeners, I've spoken about this with the beautiful Shireen Wilson. We've talked about the work of Michael Newton and the life between lives and the space where we go to reset and plan and assess and prepare. But this fourth dimension is really interesting, Tina, and it sounds like this is what you're getting to. This is the space where we need a bit of help from either souls that are there or from ourselves. Is that correct?
That is an excellent point, because the problem is a lot of people become mired in this fourth dimension. And I would love to tell you that most people cross over into that higher fifth dimension heaven world. But the truth is that they don't. They don't know. Religions don't tell people what to do at death, except the Buddhists. They are very specific. But most religions don't prepare you. It's like, yes, everybody goes to heaven, but maybe not. What if you died in battle and you don't know you're dead? What if you're a child and you're waiting for an adult to tell you what to do and where to go? What if you died a super traumatic death in an accident or you were murdered? Your trauma is so great, all you can see is darkness around you. If you took your own life, then you see a great deal of darkness. Your despair seems to go with you into the fourth dimension. And this is where becoming a ghost helper is. If this is where this begins, this is the whole point, is when you help a ghost, this will be the compassion you will want for yourself. You give to others, it's the nature of the Buddha nature or the Christ nature or whatever spiritual being works for you. That level of compassion for a child that doesn't understand, and you request an angel to stand beside that child or that person or that adult or that wounded individual or that person who took their life, and you ask the angel to gently cross them over. It's the kindest, most gentle thing to do, and it doesn't need to be surrounded by fear. You're surrounding the moment in love and compassion, and that may assuage fears in many people.
So this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this chat with you, my beautiful friend, is as a collective, I don't think this needs to be outlined too much, but I'll just explain it anyway. As a collective, we have a very unhealthy relationship with death. As whether if
my gosh, that's so true.
Yeah, right. And it's whether we are religious, right? And I've done many shows on, the beautiful religions of the world, but unfortunately, a lot of the man-made aspects that have been layered on top that cause a lot of separation and trauma. Whether we are atheist, whether we are agnostic, wherever you are on the scale, there is a very unhealthy relationship with death, right? And it's, as Tina was saying, there's so much fear. And if we are a soul that gets stuck in this fourth dimension, as Tina is saying, they aren't just staying there and having their own challenges. They are impacting us still in the 3D in many ways, in many situations, in many environments. So, Tina, I'd love to ask you now as we go deeper into this topic, and I hope people are really getting into this intention of, I want to steer this topic now into a better relationship with death and ghosts and all of this. Tina, explain to me now how we as ghost helpers, or you as the ghost helper, what we can start doing for these souls that are stuck in this transitionary or this fourth dimension. What tips, what does it look like?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to how a ghost impacts the living.
Yeah, please.
Because this all goes hand in hand. If you have a loved one who has perished, and I will use the word suicide. I know people don't like that word, but in this moment, I will use that word. They are always sorry. I have never helped a person who took their own life who wasn't deeply and profoundly sorry they made that decision. And they hang around is a casual word. They stay with the people. And when you are in the fourth dimension, there's no gravity. You can ricochet and ping between everyone who thinks about you because you travel with the speed of thought. Let me repeat that. When you are a ghost, you travel with the speed of thought. So you can, anyone who thinks about you, you're right there. If someone is grieving you, your presence prolongs their grief. Not because you're trying to be negative, although I have certainly met some who were, but because you're also grieving your death. If you died suddenly, or you're sorry, or you were in an accident, I have children to raise, a job to go back to, I have people who need me, I can't be dead. I've had so many of them say, I'm sorry, you don't understand. I have a meeting next week and a nail appointment, I can't be dead. So very fun, interesting conversation.
It's funny, Tina, because it reminds me, there's a Ram Dass quote that I really like about explaining death, and it's, there's nothing to fear with death. Death is like taking off a tight shoe or a tight sock. But it sounds like, from what you're explaining, some of us haven't taken off that tight shoe or that tight sock fully yet, and we're still in this sort of human ego aspect that holds on to a lot of the human experiences that can sometimes cause separation. Is that?
That's exactly right. And by the way, I think the world of Ram Dass is a remarkable individual.
Yeah.
Read his work, studied his work. And when that person is still grieving, it's as if your grief and their grief become all kind of mangled and intertwined. Not because someone's doing something deliberately negative. It's not that at all. When we love with all of our hearts, letting go of someone is so hard. But when you cross them over, and I'll go over how to do that shortly.
Yeah.
But
We'll
the
come back to that.
concept of people think that if you cross them over, then, oh my gosh, they're gone and you don't have access to them anymore. But the truth is that the love has no boundary. Love has no separation. That love is just as present in the heaven world, perhaps more so, because that person is not in pain. They have their questions answered, and they can be of more service to the living because they are in the heaven world. It also helps the living people, the family, the friends, release attachment. And attachment causes you to hold on and stay in grief longer than may be beneficial for you. Grief is a necessary process because it enables you to process and move through the memories, the experiences you had with the individual. Grief is exhausting. Grief clouds you. So when you cross someone over, now you're only dealing with your own grief.
Mm-hmm. Tina, that, it's powerful. We'll come back to the grief piece, and I also want to hear about how we can start crossing people over. But I just want to put this dot together for people listening, beautiful podcast listeners out there. When Tina talks about crossing someone over and then that helping the living, a big part of this is this idea of a soul family and a soul group and having ancestors and guides that connect to us, that give us support. A family member, a big part of this reason, Tina, that I wanted to do this chat today is that my grandmother is, she's moving through her own challenges at the moment, and I'm just, sending her my love and sending her my prayers. And, one day when she does transition, I really want to be prepared to do the things that are needed. And when we think about soul groups and soul families, my grandma has lived a wonderful life, and she has lessons that she probably still has to share with me. And if she can transition into the fifth dimension and not get stuck in that fourth area, like you've been talking about, then now she has access to come back and share those things with me if I choose to, if I invite her in, right? So I just wanted to plant this seed for people listening. This is why this is so important and why I really enjoy and think that this work that Tina's doing is so powerful. Tina, let me ask you now, to go a little bit deeper into what does this look like? And we'll come back to grief because I want to speak about that later. But what does this look like to cross someone over? How does this process work? I know you have a prayer, for example. What do you want to share around this topic?
I believe every person on earth should have the power to cross over any soul who has died without the intervention or the need of a medium or anyone else. It is a personal, private opportunity. And I wrote the crossing over prayer. It's an interesting story how it came about, but it was so that anyone can do this without having to go to some school or get certified. And the crossing over prayer is free on my websites. It's in the crossing over prayer book. And what the prayer says, and let's say that you don't have the book and you don't have my websites and you don't remember the prayer. Okay. Can you still do it? Yes, you can. If you fill your heart with love and you ask God to send angels to you and to the person you're requesting receive the help, and you ask those angels to transition this person to the heaven world right now, that can be all that's necessary. You may have to say it several times. Some souls are very stubborn. They are convinced they either they didn't die or they have to help you, and if they leave, that they can't help you or control you, which I've seen in many situations. But ask, if you think the soul is difficult, ask for an archangel. If the soul is a child, and you've done many, many of them, ask for a child angel to come and hold the hand of the child who died, that soul, and that ask that child angel to guide this little girl or little boy across that light bridge to the heaven world. The
throat chakra, my friend, I feel it.
Yeah. The love in your heart opens up this beautiful doorway to this unbelievable light. And for many people, they feel a shift. And this shift is subtle. It's not like, somebody turns a switch. It's this subtle feeling. It's like the room gets brighter for you. It's your own personal miracle. Now, if you're having to cross over someone who has terrified you, let's look at a difficult situation.
Well, Tina, pause there for a second because I want to speak about that separately because we had a chat about murderers and people that have conducted. So let's go there next. But let me just hit on that angel piece because I just felt all that love and that emotion moving through you just then. And I want to, again, for people listening, I think at the time of me releasing this episode, I would have released another episode talking about angels specifically. And I want people to, if you grew up in a religious household, I think it can be very easy for us to put angels in a particular box. Angels are this being with wings and this shape, and they're humanoid. And yes, they may appear in that way, but also open yourself up to them being much more than that. And the angels that Tina was just explaining, they're more of a force of love. They're more of an entity of love and light. And I would encourage everyone tuning in, if you have trauma with a religious upbringing, for example, angels don't have to be connected to that. Angels are beyond religion. Angels are beyond a lot of these belief systems. And when we can call to them to do this act that Tina is sharing with us today, it's not just for the soul that we're helping. As you just heard Tina explain, it's also for the receiver. It's also for the human that's alive still, that's in the process, as you heard Tina sharing some of her beautiful love. So is that accurate, Tina? Do you agree with some of those perspectives on angels?
I would say that is 100,000% on the money. I could not agree with you more, and I'd like to add that
Please.
A lot of people I have met say they don't want to impose on their angel. Angels are busy. An angel couldn't be. ask an angel, they almost start to stutter. And I gently remind them that angels are beings who are also in a process of evolution. They're a whole different life forms. Human beings can never be angels. It's a whole different being. And angels incur karma when they help mortal people. It's really quite remarkable. And when you ask for an angel, they are so delighted to help us. And can you imagine the joy of an angel in assisting a soul to transition into the light? There are many, many, many people who have felt damaged by religion, who felt betrayed by religion. And I would offer that there is no religion in the afterlife. There is no religion in the heaven world. There is the most powerful love and light. So if you can put religion in a little box and perhaps put it away on the shelf, and then just look at this as the most profound expression of love and compassion, something we will each want for ourselves.
Oh, we might have to do another conversation, Tina, on angels. But I just to share a little story here, then I want to get back to the souls that are more challenging, as we were just saying. But I've had a couple of angel experiences, but every single one of them have been in my heart. Like I've only felt when the angel has come in, it's just been in my. I've only felt it as a giant explosion. That's the only way I can describe it. Explosion of love in my heart space. I didn't feel it in any other area. It was just only in my heart. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I just to hit on that point of not asking for help, this is another piece of the angel conversation. And I think this is from religious perspectives. We can feel unworthy. We can feel like we're not worthy.
Absolutely true.
Right. And if you're listening to this, you've never been more worthy, right? You've just, hold that, look at that belief. And I would ask you to surrender into it and ask yourself, is this really true? Because as Tina's describing, as I've describing, you have all the worth inside of you. And if it's angels, whether it's divinity, whether it's all these aspects today, it's just waiting for you to ask, waiting for you to tap into it. Tina, let's go back now to what you were saying before around these more challenging souls that, whether it's murderers, whether it's, more intense humans that have lived lives of, let's just say, incurring a lot of karma. What does it look like, this crossing over process for a soul like that? I assume it's different. Do you want to speak to this?
When someone has committed murder, there's a wonderful book by, I think his name is David Hawkins, and it's Power versus Force. Cannot recommend this book highly enough, because again,
the scale of consciousness,
which is very, I don't want to become too complicated with this, but on that scale, the lowest on the scale is suicide and then murder. Those are the very lowest levels of consciousness or frequency, as he says. Again, a powerful book, very logical book, and grateful for such a tool. And when you understand that those are very, very low frequencies, violence against oneself, violence against another, sometimes the soul is manipulated. Sometimes the soul comes in with murderous ideation or whatever has driven that person to take their own life. Those souls can require special assistance. Again, that's why the Crossing Over Prayer book was written. There are specific prayers for murderers and for those who use suicide to leave. And there are also prayers for the victims of murder and for the families of suicide. And there are prayers for after you have crossed them over. And would it be all right if I shared that particular story?
Well, yes, I would love to, my friend. I would love for you to share it, but let me just ask a quick question with this, just so I'm understanding it. And so, because if I'm usually a little bit questioning, people listening might be as well. With the scale of consciousness and those lower frequencies, this lower frequency in your experience could be leading to them staying in that fourth dimension, correct?
That's a very, very good point. Thank you.
Yeah. And then, so then if they're in that fourth dimension with that lower frequency, what the prayer and this love and this compassion, or even bringing in angels, what it is doing is it's helping them raise out of that dense, low frequency into these higher frequencies of compassion, of love, of all of the higher emotions, to then help them transition. Is that a good analysis? Is that the process?
That's an excellent analysis. And let me take it a step further.
Yeah.
Sociopathic behavior is born. And that, having studied many levels, many aspects of psychiatry, psychology, and sociology, because if you're studying metaphysics, you have to study it all. For me personally, it's such an expansive topic that psychologically a child starts murderous behavior as early as 3 or 4. And there's a huge trial to families that I don't think this is widely known. And then that person, at some point, they die and they don't cross over because they're in the fourth dimension. And it's as if, I'm using my hands visual, but if you are listening to this, it's as if a piece of their soul is shaved off every time. And there's less of what makes us compassionate beings with each incarnation. And this lack of conscience for how many people you can kill grows. And I would invite everyone's attention to the 23rd Psalm, which, by the way, exists in virtually all religious practices and all religions all over the world. There is a version of the 23rd Psalm. And in one of the passages, he restoreth my soul. Mm. If you stay, or that ghost stays in the fourth dimension, that soul is not restored. There's so many people coming in with so many psychological problems, and they're coming back very, very quickly from this place that is not filling them with light. That when they are crossed over, imagine the concept of restoring to wholeness the soul of a mass murderer. Mm. And I know that the thought is, they should stay in whatever someone's concept of hell is. But what if we looked at it differently? Yeah. What if we looked at it that they could be restored, and when they came back for another life, this time they didn't kill anyone. It doesn't erase the karma. It's so beyond my pay grade.
Yeah.
That karma still has to be
resolved.
Dealt with. But they are different because you help them.
So Tina, I love this description, and I'm actually going to add to this. So in the work that I do, I do a lot of work with past lives, right? And this term comes up for me of soul loss or soul fragmentation. And
yes,
it's very,
absolutely,
very similar to what you're saying about the shaving of the soul.
Yes.
But what's important for people to understand is that fragment, that shaving, that soul piece that's lost isn't eternally lost. It's like it's disconnected as a fragmented web. But when we are given love, when we're given compassion, when we start to bring awareness to these aspects that we've created through the choices we've made in our different incarnations, i.e., in this example, the murderous ones, when we can start to bring light and love and unconditional compassion, now we start to regain these parts of our soul again. We start to bring them back into our wholeness so we can be ourselves fully again. And when we are full, we're not one of separation. We're not one of tension. We're not one of resistance. Does that add to what you're saying, my friend? Does that resonate?
That's icing on the cake. It's absolutely perfect. It's a perfect explanation. And it not only does it help this soul who is so fragmented, that fragmented soul will haunt their victims, the families of their victims. And once they're crossed over, it's like someone goes click, turns that haunting off. It benefits the living in ways that people who are alive couldn't imagine, because they're so filled with anger and hate and rage. And there was I'm going to do a little aside here. There was chemically, the body is different. The body of murderers chemically is different. Let's go back to science. There was a physician in Indiana, I remember this part, who discovered that there are certain chemicals lost in the brain of all murderers, and that prisons were filled with people who had chemical deficiencies in the body, which to me is manifest that something is shaved off and missing when they come back, which validates exactly what you were saying.
And I love this, my friend. This shows the holistic nature of what we are, right? We aren't just spirit, right? We are mind and body too. So if there is a characteristic of the soul with this shaved piece or this fragment piece, the body speaks it, right? The body tells the story of our lives. But in this case, it also tells the story of our past lives and our different incarnations. And yeah, I love it. So many little avenues we can jump off here, my friend. Let's take it back here now. And I want a couple more questions before we finish up here today that I want to get from your beautiful heart. And I want to maybe shift now to grief. And you talked about it a little bit before, about how, this whole crossing over process can really support grief. And we spoke about this in our pre-chat. In the world at the moment, with everything that's going on, world events, we don't have to, I'm sure everyone can understand what I mean by that this, sudden deaths and people passing away and then the subsequent grief, either from the soul that's been passed away or the family members connected, is very what's the word? Tangible. Yes. Tangible and thick at the moment. So I'm wondering, my friend, what do you think this whole crossing over process, and how can this support the grief process, either from the soul that's crossing over or us as the family members that are interacting with that soul?
One of the primary elements of grief is helplessness. There's nothing I can do. I'm helpless, and I can't change what's happened, and I'm fighting it. And you cannot go through mortal life without experiencing grief. The point of the crossing over prayer, for an astonishing variety of types of death, which is in the book, but the prayer alone will work, is to empower the living to help the dead. And even when they are crossed over, there are prayers to send to them that include your love. And this was made abundantly clear to me by a client in North Dakota, very cold place. And her son took his life at 17, and she used the crossing over prayer, and she crossed him over herself. And she couldn't believe how much better she felt after that was done. It surprised her. And she said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Well, he was sorry." I helped someone cross over a 7-year-old who died very suddenly. She had meningitis and she was gone. And once she was crossed over, it was like the sun came out, and they said, "I don't know why I feel better. It feels very strange." And I said, "Because you did the last act as a parent. You did something that was so spiritually uplifting for the soul and for yourself and for your friends and for your family, that the goodness is returned like this whoosh that comes to you. And you now know where the soul is. I hear people say to me, I like to think that they are in heaven or they are. What if you know? What does that do for your grieving process? Yes, you miss them. I mean, when my brother died, within seconds, I had him crossed over. I was there at the moment of his death. I was incredibly close to this man, just adored him. I crossed him over, and I saw the angels greet him in this joyous moment. And I felt his joy. And it may be that when you use this crossing over prayer, or you just request those angels, that you get a glimpse of that joy, and it does something that heals those sad parts of you. Imagine that the whole world could do something so elegantly simple and help themselves and others. But the benefit to the soul is beyond calculation. Let me stop for a minute.
Yeah, you're good, my friend. I'm just receiving it and feeling it all. And it just to respond to this, what's bubbling up in me is that this prayer and this process and everything you're explaining here today, from a grief perspective, and I speak about this in a lot of the work that I do around emotions and helping people emotionally heal. A big part of when we lose someone we love is we can tend to think that the way that we are feeling is all about them, right? We can think that, if my brother, my mother, my sister, my grandmother, they passed away tomorrow, God forbid, and the reaction I had to that, it's very easy for me to think all that I am feeling is related to them, they're giving me this. And yes, there are parts of that relationship that I deserve to mourn and grieve and have emotional reaction around. But ultimately, the deepest part of my reaction to their passing are the parts that are inside of me already, right? The emotions, the anger, the grief, maybe some guilt, maybe some shame, that who knows how long it's been inside of me. And the death process has triggered these emotions to come up, to be seen, to
Correct.
be felt, to be acknowledged. So when we have a beautiful process like you're describing of helping them and knowing that they're transitioning and they're moving from that third to that fifth and not getting stuck in the fourth, now we don't have any more excuse. We don't have any more excuses, right? We can actually now sit with our stuff, right? And we can process our part of the relationship. We can process why am I angry that my mother passed away, right? Why do I feel sad? Is it purely because of their role, or do I have a role in this relationship? Is there a part of me that hasn't let something go, or hasn't forgiven something, or hasn't moved on from a situation that we've had together in the past? Does that resonate, my friend, in your experience from what you've seen?
That absolutely resonates, and how you grieve is dependent on several factors: the age of the person at death and their method of death. And those two factors, if someone lives to be 98 years old, then they had a full life, and you're going to miss them and all of these emotions. It's not the same kind of grief as someone who dies at 5 or 6. It just isn't, because at 5 or 6, you think, I'm never going to see her grow up. I'm never going to, welcome his grandchild. I'm never going to fill in the blank. Those things can't. So you're grieving what will never happen. Whereas someone who dies in their sleep and they were in their late 90s, 100, you feel as if their life was complete, and your relationship with them, even if it was stormy, you can process it more readily. The person is murdered, you feel cheated. They were taken from me. And your emotions are directly tied by the age and of the death. The person was at death and their method of death.
Yeah. So, Tina, thank you for that breakdown. And it's interesting from an ancestral perspective, when we can look at, again, the past life element, these themes of the timestamp of the death, they get passed on through the ancestral line, right? So if I, the child, receive a stamp from my mother who died of, let's just make something up. Let's say she passed on from colon cancer at the age of 80, and that she did not process the emotions and the things around that, right? Well, now that's being passed on to me as the child to, when I hit that age and that hasn't been moved through, there's now an opportunity for me to heal that, not just for me, but also for her, especially if she is in that transitionary stage. Tina, I guess the last question here I want to pass to you and get your reflection on is, obviously this conversation today is a very different one when we are looking at the whole topic of death. And I kind of want to finish here today with some, your loving insights with all of this, bringing it all together. What do you think this kind of work with ghosts and helping them and helping these spirits and transitioning them out of the fourth to the fifth and the emotions and all the things that we've discussed, how can this help us shift as a collective into a better relationship with what death actually is?
I would start with a quote from The Lightworker's Guide to Healing Grief, which I wrote when my niece died. Every birth is a dawn, and every death is a night, each one eternally folding into the next. And the night is alive with stars. And if we look at the stars as the souls, they're always, always shining. And when you have the power to transition someone else, to offer them a guide, to bring in an angel, to stand up to an emotional situation with grace and courage, something inside of you grows spiritually on a level you wouldn't have imagined. But there's something even more precious, and it is the gratitude of those whom you have helped. And maybe there are people whom you have crossed over that you don't know, like the gentleman in Amsterdam who takes the prayer through all the battlefields in Europe, and he hears all these thank yous. The gratitude that is returned to the living person isn't something you would have ever imagined. And it's a subtle, beautiful, loving energy that's hard to describe, but it's like snow falling on a night, and you wake up and it just fills you with delight.
Speaking of being filled with light, when you explain that perspective, there's a part of me that resonates, and not just resonates with truth and, it resonates with, that lands and that makes sense, but resonates with, that's familiar, right? That the way that you described, that's like, that's something that I've experienced before. That's something that I've been through before. And again, I just want to encourage everyone that's been listening today, don't just listen to these conversations with your beautiful, logical thinking mind, but notice how you respond to the things that Tina says, right? Notice how your body responds and that soul that speaks through that body, how it responds, because often it's giving you signs of, this is something that I've done before. This is something that I've been through before. Because as we've been talking today, from past lives, we have in many ways. Tina, thank you for sharing that with me. And I have one more question for you, but before we get there, I want to ask you two things here. One, are you comfortable sharing one of your prayers with us? I know you've talked about them a little bit today. Are you comfortable sharing one with everyone listening?
I would be delighted.
Yeah. So before you do that, can you share with people listening if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more? I know that you've talked about your beautiful books. Where can they go to find out more about your work and to dive deeper into all that you're offering the world?
I have a website called Ghost Helpers with an S, ghosthelpers.com. It's also tinaerwin.com. Both of them are very similar. Ghost Helpers has videos and it shows all the books. And if you want to reach out to me, contact@ghosthelpers.com. And there's a contact me page at the end in one of the things on the website.
And as always, just for people listening, if you go to your show details within Spotify or Apple, I put all the links to Tina's resources and her website, so you can just go straight to those details, click the link, and you'll land on Tina's details and what she's offering the world. All right, Tina, hit us with one of your beautiful prayers.
All right. This is the crossing over prayer. Dearest Lord above, I humbly request that you take any and all souls who have found my divine light of service into the heaven world right now. I ask that an angel wrap each soul in a blanket of healing light right now. I pray that every single soul will use the light bridge provided by my angelic team to transition into the heaven world right now. I send love and healing to all souls, no matter how they died, no matter their level of guilt, without any judgment or prejudice whatsoever, right now. May the light of your love, Father, embrace and keep all of these souls now and forever. Amen.
So, Tina, thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm closing my eyes now and sort of just feeling that prayer and those words move through me. And what I really want to encourage, again, people listening, is the power of that prayer. That's the first time I've heard it, but the power of that prayer is that it goes beyond religion, right? It could be a religious prayer. I want to say this with love to all the people that are listening that are following a beautiful religious denomination. If it's working for you and if you're finding unity and love and compassion out of it, wonderful. But if you aren't, I do want to encourage you that prayer still applies to you, right? That prayer still applies to your beautiful journey and what you're wishing to do with the souls in your life that are transitioning, right? So I want to and push people with love. Try these prayers, even if you don't have a religious background. They can be just as powerful. Do you agree with that, Tina?
I absolutely agree with that. And if you want to try them out, they're on both websites in video form. You can just play them.
Yeah.
If you're not comfortable reading them yourself, just play them. Just push play. It's so easy.
Yeah. And the other thing that came up too, that I'll just share quickly, is invite your support team in. Like as you're reading that prayer, I can imagine it's even more powerful before you do it, inviting in, people that you work with. So for example, I work with ancestors, I work with my inner child, I work with some angels, I work with some ascended masters. With this prayer, my friend, would it be amplified if you sort of set up your energetic space before doing it?
Absolutely. All assistance is powerful and beneficial to any and all souls. And that's especially important if you're dealing with a mass casualty event. Mm-hmm. And I need to remind people that it's life. Sometimes there are mass casualty events. And I do have prayers for that specifically in the Crossing Over Prayer book. Yeah. That's also an audio book that you could keep on your phone, and you just pick it and you let it play for you if you're too emotional to say it yourself.
Mm. Yeah, it's bringing all hands on ship, right? All hands on board. And,
all hands on deck, yeah.
Yeah. And I think another piece here is we have to understand that when we go to these higher realms as well, it's very rare that a being is by themselves, right? And maybe you've experienced this, my friend, but I've noticed that whenever I connect to, whether it's an angel, an ascended master, an ancestor, a spirit guide, they're usually in groups, right? This is the whole idea of group consciousness. We don't ascend as individuals. We ascend as collectives that are a part of the bigger collective. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But Tina, my final question here for you today, and I love you, my friend. Thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience. The name of this podcast is The Cosmic Love Antenna. And my intention is to help spread the word about what that love actually is. Love is so much more than an emotion. Love is what we are made of, is what it is. To me, it's God. It's the higher power. So I'm wondering, Tina, How do you personally define that love word?
It is a love of humanity as a whole. All the people of the world. We are all the same. We love our children. We love our families. We might fight with them. But at the end of the day, if we are fortunate enough to have a family and we can love them, love is a million facets. And when we embrace the humanity of us all, and you're sending prayers of healing to the entire world, not just yourself, you are lifted up. And it's as if the higher realms smile upon each of us because they also so love humanity. If we could only understand that level of love, we would be raised up and we would have a smile on our faces, even in perhaps the most challenging moments.
I felt that wave of emotion move through you, Tina, and thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful, beautiful definition. I'm actually still sitting with it and letting it move through me. But Tina, I love you very much. Thank you for spending time with me today. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and your day where you are in the world. Beautiful listeners out there in the podcast world, thank you for tuning into this episode today. I hope it's given you some value and some insight and some deeper connection to the layers beyond the physical reality. We leave you with this today, and we wish you a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Until next time here on the Cosmic Love Antenna, have a beautiful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow Harrison on Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse at Harrison Ma. That's Harrison, Meagher.